She took a pair of scissors and sliced my wedding dress from neckline to hem, then smiled and said, "Now he can't marry you looking like that." That was the moment I stopped breathing. The lace my grandmother had hand sewn, the silk I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for, the dress I had hidden carefully in my closet to keep it safe, destroyed in one motion, by the woman who said she wanted to help with preparations, by the woman who called herself my future mother-in-law, and she didn't even hide it. She stood there, her hands still holding the scissors, looking me in the eye with that smug little tilt to her chin, like she'd won something. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was stunned. I hadn't even walked down the aisle yet. I hadn't even said I do, and she'd already made sure I'd never forget who held the power in that family. So I ask you, what would you do if the woman who raised your fiancé destroyed the one thing you'd waited your whole life to wear? Would you scream? Would you cancel the wedding? Or would you smile and show up anyway? Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? And what would you have done if you found your wedding dress in shreds hours before your ceremony? Because I'm Evelyn Carter, and this is the story of how I got married without a dress and left the altar more powerful than I ever imagined. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 59 years old now, and it took me decades to tell this story out loud without trembling. Back then I was just 26. A librarian by day, an amateur baker by night, and a woman who believed in love the way little girls believe in fairy tales, completely foolishly and without a backup plan. I grew up in a small town in Vermont. My father passed away when I was 10, and my mother raised me with the kind of quiet strength you only appreciate once you're older. We didn't have much, but she taught me to value kindness over beauty, truth over comfort, and silence only when it serves peace, not fear. I met Anthony at the town's annual charity book drive. He was tall, soft-spoken, and the kind of man who asked questions and actually listened to the answers. We bonded over our love for old maps and blueberry muffins. Within a year, we were engaged. Anthony came from a wealthier family in New York. His father had passed, and he was raised by his mother, Judith Whitmore. Judith was polished. Everything about her, her clothes, her voice, her silences carried the weight of expectation. She never raised her voice, but her disappointment cut sharper than any yell could have. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down and said, "So you're Evelyn? You're different than I pictured." No smile, no warmth, just cool observation. At the time, I mistook it for nervousness. I laughed it off. That was my first mistake. The second came quickly. I tried to win her over. I brought her homemade peach preserves the next visit. She gave them to the maid without opening them. I offered to help in the kitchen during a dinner party. She told me, "We have staff, dear." I once overheard her whisper to a guest that I was charming in a rustic sort of way. Still, I smiled. I told myself I was marrying Anthony, not his mother. But Judith had other plans. Anthony, bless his heart, was loyal to his mother in the way only a son who'd lost his father young could be. He didn't see the barbs. He thought we just needed more time to bond. "She's protective," he said. "Give her space." I gave her space. She took my confidence. There were subtle things, like when she offered to upgrade my wedding dress to something less homespun, or suggested a prenup that she insisted was just a formality. She referred to my mother, who had sacrificed everything for me, as that seamstress woman. My mother was a retired schoolteacher, and still, I bit my tongue. Because I loved Anthony, because I thought silence was grace, and because no one had ever taught me that you don't earn respect by shrinking yourself. By the time the wedding week rolled around, I was exhausted. My mother had arrived 2 days before the ceremony, and I clung to her presence like a lifeline. We stayed at a bed and breakfast while final arrangements were being handled. Judith insisted she manage the dress delivery and final fittings. I was hesitant, but Anthony assured me she's trying. So I let her. She called the morning of the rehearsal and said she had my dress in her guest room at her estate waiting for me. I had it steamed, she said. Come try it on before the others arrive. I hesitated, but I went. I drove to her home alone and rang the bell. Judith answered in a silk robe, hair perfect, smile tight. She led me upstairs. The dress was laid out across the bed, still in the protective covering. My heart relaxed a little. Maybe this was peace, finally. She closed the door behind me. I unzipped the cover. That's when I saw it. A 6-inch tear down the center. Not frayed, not accidental. Cut, deliberately, with surgical precision. And on the nightstand, the scissors, still warm from her grip. She leaned against the doorframe and said without blinking, "Now maybe he'll reconsider." I stood frozen. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. That maybe I had dreamed the whole thing up. That surely no one, no mother, could be that cruel. But then Judith walked toward me, heels clicking on the hardwood, slow, deliberate, as if savoring every second of the devastation she had just caused. "I told you," she said, her voice calm and quiet, "that this family has standards, traditions. You can't just marry into us because you made my son laugh once in a bookstore." She circled the bed like a predator. "This dress was never meant for someone like you. You're a passerby, Evelyn. A phase. A naive, small-town project Anthony took on to prove he wasn't his father's son. But he'll grow up. And when he does, you won't be part of the picture." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even touch the dress. Instead, I picked up the scissors and held them in my hand. Not to retaliate, but to make sure she couldn't touch them again. She watched me like a hawk, expecting a reaction, but I gave her none. I zipped up the garment bag with the torn dress inside, whispered a thank you that made her narrow her eyes, and left the house. That night, I told Anthony. He was stunned, not defensive, not accusing, just stunned. "She wouldn't," he said, shaking his head. "She did. I'll talk to her." "No," I replied. "You marry me, or you marry her shadow." To his credit, he married me. And to her credit, she made sure I never forgot that. The wedding went on with a new dress rushed, and not quite mine. Judith didn't speak to me once the entire ceremony. She clutched Anthony's arm in every photo, leaned in whenever the camera turned, as if to steal space from me by sheer proximity. The guests noticed. My mother noticed. Anthony tried not to, but that was only the beginning. After the honeymoon, things grew colder. Judith invited us to dinners without asking me, then acted surprised when I couldn't attend. She gave Anthony expensive gifts and labeled them for the house, even though she knew I wouldn't accept anything from her. She spoke to me as if I were a guest, not family, correcting my pronunciation at the table, interrupting me mid-sentence, asking Anthony about matters I had already handled. Then came the first grandchild, and that's when it really began. She insisted on being in the delivery room. She redecorated the nursery without asking. She referred to herself as Mommy Number 2. Once, while holding my newborn, she looked at me and said, "You'll learn to share." But the worst moment, that came on Christmas Eve. I had spent all week preparing the meal, turkey stuffing cranberry sauce from scratch. The whole family gathered around the table. And just as I served the final dish, Judith took her wine glass, clinked it lightly, and said, "To Anthony, for managing to keep our legacy clean despite some distractions." Everyone laughed. Except me. Except my mother. I stood there holding a plate of roasted carrots and realized I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was an intruder who had overstayed her welcome. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen long after the dishes were done, and the guests had left, staring at the empty wine glass Judith had used, still sitting on the table like a taunt. The room was quiet. Everyone else was asleep. Even the baby had finally settled. But inside me there was noise. The words she'd said, distractions replayed in my head like a cruel loop. The laughter. The way Anthony had shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The way no one had stood up for me. Not even my own husband. I tried to swallow the pain. I tried to be the bigger person. I told myself, this is just how Judith is. It's not about me. Don't let it break you. But then I saw the Christmas gift she had left under the tree for me. A self-help book titled How to Be Less Sensitive, wrapped in tissue paper. No note, just that. And something inside me cracked. I left the kitchen, went upstairs, and called my mother. It was well past midnight, but she picked up on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call," she said. And just like that, I started to cry. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I told her everything. The dress, the cold silences, the smirks, the dinner table corrections, the delivery room invasion, the toast, the book. She didn't interrupt me. She just listened. And when I finished, all she said was, "I see now why you've stopped smiling in your pictures." That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. I hadn't noticed, but she had. We stayed on the phone for hours that night, and by the time the sun came up, I knew something had to change. I couldn't go on like this. Not for another year. Not for another holiday. Not for another moment. But I also knew I couldn't just confront Judith. That would only give her more fuel. No, I had to be smarter than that. So I started taking notes. Mental at first, then physical. Every time she said something degrading, I wrote it down. When she criticized my parenting in front of others. When she brought up Anthony's ex-girlfriend at a family gathering. When she accidentally left me out of the family group chat. I documented everything. And then I found something I hadn't expected: emails. Old emails tucked away in an old shared inbox Anthony had forgotten about. Back when we were planning the wedding. Back when Judith had been helping. Emails between Judith and the bridal boutique. Ones I had never seen. She hadn't just cut my dress, she had written to the designer behind my back and changed the order 3 times, claiming the bride has no taste. She had cancelled the veil I chose. She had requested alterations I never approved. And the cherry on top, an email to her sister forwarded by mistake that read, "She'll never be a real daughter, but she'll make a decent placeholder until Anthony wakes up." That was it. That was the moment the grief inside me turned into something sharper. Not revenge, not yet, but clarity. And once you see someone clearly, you can never unsee them again. I didn't tell Anthony right away. I wanted to God. I wanted to so badly. Every night when we crawled into bed and he kissed my forehead like everything was normal, I had to bite my tongue. I'd look at him and think, how can you not see it? How can you not see her? But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: a direct confrontation, especially with someone like Judith, is a trap. You end up looking emotional, unstable, defensive. And that's exactly the image she wanted to paint of me. So I stayed silent. I smiled when I had to. I nodded along at dinners. I even thanked her once for a baby onesie that still had the tags on it from a clearance rack. But behind that smile, I was building something. Carefully, patiently. I printed every email I found and tucked them into a locked drawer. I copied texts and saved screenshots. I even downloaded the home security footage from the day she accidentally walked into our bedroom without knocking, just to find the baby's pacifier, of course. Then I started recording audio. Nothing illegal, just snippets. Conversations in the kitchen when Anthony wasn't around. Little things like, "You know, I raised Anthony without any help. That's probably why he turned out so well." Or, "It's hard to watch you struggle with something so basic like bottle feeding, but I suppose you'll learn eventually." Then came the big one at a baby shower she insisted on throwing. I wore a blouse she'd always commented on negatively before, just to see what she'd say this time. She leaned in and whispered, "That color doesn't suit you. Makes you look tired." But then again, "You are tired, aren't you?" Click. I had the recorder running in my pocket. I saved every file. And while I did all this, I also started looking inward at who I used to be before all of this. Before the wedding. Before the cuts in the dress. Before the slow erosion of my spirit. I found an old notebook filled with sketches, designs I used to dream of turning into a bridal collection. Back then, I wanted to start my own business. But I shelved that dream when I got pregnant. Judith said, "Now isn't the time to be chasing fantasies." And I believed her, but not anymore. That week, I pulled the notebook out and signed up for an online design class. Quietly, no fanfare, just something for myself. Every night, while Anthony slept beside me, I watched lessons, practiced stitching again, and started sketching ideas. My fingers remembered the way. My mind remembered the spark. It felt like meeting an old friend I didn't know I'd missed so much. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control, not of Judith, not of Anthony, but of myself. I knew this wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was preparation. I wasn't going to beg for space anymore. I was going to claim it. Because when you've been quietly pushed to the margins for long enough one day, you stop asking for permission. And you begin building your escape. It happened on a Wednesday. I remember the day vividly because I had just finished a dress prototype, my first full piece in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd spent weeks putting it together during quiet midnight hours, while Judith slept down the hall and Anthony worked late. That morning I hung it carefully in the spare room closet, then went down to make tea, humming for the first time in months. That's when I heard her voice. "You really think he'd choose you over his own mother?" I froze. The door to the kitchen hadn't fully closed, and her voice was coming from the baby monitor I had left in the nursery. The second monitor hidden, connected to the base, was in my bedroom, still switched on. I'd left it by accident. I grabbed the receiver and listened. "I've been patient," she was saying to someone, probably on a call. But she's turning him soft, emotional, weak. He's not the man I raised. And if she thinks that wedding dress stunt was harsh, she hasn't seen anything yet. My breath caught in my throat. She admitted it. She had done it. She wasn't sorry. She was proud. I pressed the record button. When Anthony came home that evening, I asked him gently if we could talk after dinner. I had laid everything out on the table, figuratively and literally. Screenshots, emails, audio clips, a printed-out transcript of her baby monitor rant. And beside it all, my wedding dress, the one she had slashed, now stitched back together as a symbol of everything I'd survived. "Please," I said quietly, "sit." At first he thought I was exaggerating. His eyes scanned the papers, then the transcripts. I could see the war playing out on his face, loyalty to the woman who raised him, and disbelief at the depth of what she'd done. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. I smiled sadly. "Because I wanted you to see her." He stayed silent for a long time. Then slowly he reached for one of the recordings. The one from the baby shower where she whispered about me looking tired. Then another, the one where she told a neighbor on speakerphone that I was milking this motherhood thing for attention. Finally, he listened to the monitor clip, and his shoulders fell. The confrontation came the next morning. Judith came downstairs, dressed in her usual pressed blouse and pearls. I was waiting, the recorder still in my hand. Anthony stood beside me. "Mom," he said, voice tight, "we need to talk." She looked between us, her expression morphing from confusion to icy defense. "I don't know what she's told you," she began. "I heard you," Anthony interrupted. "Your own words. You hurt her. You sabotaged her dress. You called her weak. You've lied to me. For years." Judith scoffed. "So now you believe her over me?" "No," I said quietly. "He believes you, because we recorded everything." The silence after that was thunderous. Judith turned pale. "I opened my home to you," I continued. "I let you stand beside me on the biggest day of my life, and you repaid me with scissors and spite." Anthony didn't say anything. He just handed her an envelope, legal papers outlining boundaries. She had 30 days to find alternate arrangements. Financial access was suspended. Judith tried one last jab. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said. "I'm putting it back together, without the rot." And just like that, the tide turned. The woman who had dominated our home with glares and gossip suddenly looked very small, powerless, like the mask had slipped. But for me, that moment wasn't about triumph. It was about truth. Because when you speak it finally fearlessly, it echoes louder than any lie. In the days that followed, the house felt different, lighter, like the walls themselves had exhaled. Judith didn't move out immediately, of course. She lingered like a storm cloud, silent, but charged, retreating to her room and avoiding eye contact. But the dynamic had changed. For the first time, she wasn't holding the strings. And she knew it. I'd drafted a full financial reset. With Anthony's support and legal counsel, I removed her from all secondary bank authorizations. Her access to our emergency fund was revoked. We put a hold on the shared family credit line she used freely under the guise of grocery errands. And most critically, we put the deed to the house solely in our names. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. The day she discovered the changes, I heard the sound of drawers slamming upstairs. Her voice followed sharp, clipped, outraged. "You locked me out of the accounts," she barked as she stormed into the kitchen. Anthony stood calmly at the counter, stirring coffee. "We didn't lock you out," he said. "We took back what you abused." "You can't just cut me off." "I think we both know we can," I replied quietly, and we did. Her fury twisted her face into something almost unrecognizable. "This is your doing." Anthony didn't flinch. "This is the result of your own actions, Mum. You crossed too many lines for too long." Judith stood there for a moment, breathing hard. Then she laughed, a bitter, strained sound. "You'll regret this. When you're desperate and alone, don't come running to me." But the threat was empty. She could feel it. The final straw came when her social circle began to learn the truth. Somehow, maybe through the lawyer's office, maybe through our mutual acquaintances, the story of the Sabotage dress and audio recordings spread. Whispers turned into pointed questions. I wasn't the one who told them. Judith had always relied on reputation, on her carefully curated image of a selfless, elegant matriarch. But when that image cracked, there was nothing underneath to hold it up. She stopped attending her luncheons. Her phone stopped ringing. The invitations dried up. One afternoon, I found her in the living room holding an old family photo. Anthony was about to leave for work. She looked up at him, eyes red, voice trembling. "I gave up everything for you," she said. He paused. "No, Mom. You gave up everything trying to control me. And now you've lost more than just access, you've lost trust. She opened her mouth, but he was already gone. A week later, she packed her things and moved into a smaller condo on the edge of town quietly with no fanfare. She left behind a bottle of her perfume and a drawer full of silk scarves. I didn't touch them, because when someone decides to cut you down piece by piece, you don't chase after what they left behind. You rebuild, and for the first time in years, I was free to do just that. I began my rebirth quietly, no big announcements, no dramatic farewells to the past. Just small steps, consistent and rooted in purpose. The morning after Judith left, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook. Not a to-do list, not a revenge plan, just dreams I had buried. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Who was I before the fear?" I was Eleanor Brooks, once a wedding dress designer in Savannah, before I gave it up to raise Anthony and support Harold's business. I used to make silk gowns for local brides, each stitch sewn with a kind of reverence. Judith used to scoff at my hobby, calling it a waste of fabric. But those dresses had once made women feel beautiful, powerful, cherished. And so I decided to sew again. I reached out to an old friend, Miranda, someone I hadn't spoken to in a decade. She used to be my seamstress partner before life, and expectations pulled us apart. I sent her a message. "Do you still have the studio?" She replied within the hour, "And it misses you. Come by." That same afternoon, I visited the sunlit space that still smelled of lace and lavender oil. Miranda hugged me like no time had passed. She didn't ask about Judith. She didn't need to. She just rolled out a fresh bolt of satin and said, "Let's begin." I began taking private commissions again, one dress at a time. I wasn't building an empire. I was stitching myself back together. Meanwhile, I rented a little cottage on the edge of town, cozy, filled with sunlight and silence. I didn't decorate with grandeur, just framed pictures of the past I still wanted to honor, and blank space for whatever came next. Anthony visited often. At first it was awkward. The guilt sat heavy on his shoulders. But we talked, really talked. I didn't rush forgiveness, and he didn't expect it. That was the beginning of real healing between us. "I should have seen it," he said once as we shared coffee on my porch. "The way she treated you." "You saw," I told him gently. "You just weren't ready to admit it." He looked down. "You think she'll ever change?" I smiled, not bitterly, just tired. "I think some people would rather lose everything than admit they were wrong." He nodded, and then slowly he looked up. "I'm proud of you, Mom. It wasn't everything, but it was enough." One day, I was walking to the corner market when I saw a bride-to-be in tears on a bench outside. Her gown had been ruined by a careless alteration 3 days before her wedding. She was scrolling through seamstress listings, frantic. I sat beside her and said simply, "I sew, and I'd love to help." 3 hours later, we were in my kitchen, spreading tulle across the table, pinning and planning. That night, I stitched under soft lamplight, not just for her, but for the woman I used to be. And as the fabric flowed through my fingers, something clicked into place. Judith may have tried to tear me apart on the day I was meant to be celebrated, but now I was mending more than cloth. I was mending legacy. The decision came to me not in anger, but in clarity. I had built a new life. I had reclaimed my dignity, reconnected with my craft, and even restored a relationship with my son. But something still twisted deep inside me, something unfinished. It was the house I had lived in for 30 years. The house where I cooked Anthony's first meal, painted his nursery walls, buried Harold's favorite dog in the backyard. The house where Judith now threw spa parties and called me the past. I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. and maybe in a way justice. So I made an offer through a lawyer. Cold, clean, and undeniable. Judith had convinced Anthony to refinance the mortgage in her name years ago, claiming it was for tax purposes. But the documents had been sloppy, and I had quietly collected every error. Missing signatures, unclear valuations, inheritance loopholes. My lawyer called it a gift from her arrogance, so I exercised my rights. I didn't ask to buy the house. I simply did. Cash offer. Above market value. Final. Irrefutable. The call came at 10:42 a.m. on a Wednesday. My lawyer said, "Congratulations, it's yours again." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just went for a long walk in the park, where the bird song felt sharper, like I could hear the world breathing for the first time in months. 2 days later, Judith called. Her voice was ice. "You're not actually moving back in, are you?" "No," I said calmly. "I just wanted to know it was mine again." Silence. "And what about me and Anthony?" she hissed. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That's between you and the new landlord," I replied. "You'll be getting a formal notice. You'll have time to find something else." She screamed something unintelligible before hanging up. I stood there holding the phone, my heart calm, not triumphant, just steady. I had done what she never thought I would taken control legally, firmly, and without spectacle. Anthony came by that night. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He just looked tired. He said, "Mom, is this really what you want?" I turned to him soft, but sure it's not what I wanted. It's what was necessary. He nodded slowly. "She's leaving. I'll help her pack. But I'm not sure what happens next." I placed a hand on his arm. "You figure out who you are without her telling you who to be." The next week, I changed the locks. Not to lock anyone out, but to lock a chapter closed. And in that silence, standing in the hallway I once mopped at midnight after family dinners, I whispered to myself, "You did not go too far. You went just far enough to come home. But you tell me, did I go too far? Was reclaiming my house my peace too much, or just enough? Tell me in the comments, especially if you're watching from your city. I want to hear your story." I was in the garden when I heard the soft creak of the old front gate, Anthony, but not alone. Behind him, small footsteps padded against the stone path. When I turned there, she was. My granddaughter, Lily. 7 years old, cheeks rosy, a bag slung over her shoulder, far too big for her size. "Mama said we're staying somewhere else." Lily mumbled, eyes on the dandelions. "But I wanted to say goodbye to your birds." Anthony looked at me, pain drawn across his face like a stretched canvas. "She's going to stay with me at a friend's for a while. Judith's gone to her mother's." He paused. "Lily asked to come here." I knelt down beside her. "The birds missed you." She beamed, missing a front tooth, and ran to the feeder tree where I used to teach her the names cardinal, blue jay, mourning dove. She remembered them all. I made tea. Anthony and I sat on the porch while Lily ran through the yard, the hem of her tiny dress, catching grass stains, wild with joy. For a moment, we said nothing. Just watched her fly. He finally broke the silence. "She told me she cut your dress that day." My breath caught. "What?" "She said it was to make you leave. She didn't think you'd actually still show up at the wedding. Said you deserved a reminder of your place." I sipped my tea. "She always thought her cruelty made her powerful." Anthony shook his head. "I'm sorry I let her get away with so much." I didn't reply. Sometimes the truth lands heavier in silence. "I saw the old sewing machine," he added quietly. "I remember when Dad bought it for you, remember? You used to make Halloween costumes for the whole neighborhood." I smiled, eyes stinging. I was a different woman back then. "You still are. You've always been stronger than all of us combined." That night, Lily asked to stay. I tucked her in on the little couch by the window, gave her my childhood quilt. She whispered, "Grandma, are you going to live here forever now?" I kissed her forehead. "As long as I want." She smiled. Good. Outside, the moon glowed through the stained glass window Judith once called tacky. But to me, it looked like hope, colourful, imperfect, real. When the porch light flickered and the wind brushed the curtains, I whispered to the night more to myself than anyone. I didn't choose the house. I chose to never be erased from it. And I stood by that choice, not for vengeance, but for voice. For every woman who ever got pushed to the background of her own life, I say this: I am Eleanor Hart, and I've returned not to be welcomed, but to be seen. Have you ever walked into a home you helped build, only to realize you were no longer welcome in it? Has your love, your labor, your loyalty been repaid with silence, indifference, or even cruelty? If my story moved something in your heart, if you've ever found your bags on the porch, your name left off the invitation, your picture missing from the mantel, then tell me your story. Leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, your city. Your voice matters. And if you want more stories of women who reclaimed their voices, who turned pain into power, who stood back up when the world said, "Sit down," hit that subscribe button. This is just the beginning. You're not alone. We see you, we hear you, and you are not invisible.